Okay, welcome to the second installment of this particular video series, all about black codes and how they affected the South after the Civil War, and kind of go into the future and bleed into things like the civil rights movement, etc. So we left off here with the question of what the heck went wrong if we passed all of these Reconstruction amendments, which we went over in the last video, the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments. What went wrong? What happened? Here we go. So the beginning of this all stems from the resistance to some of these amendments from some of the southern states and some of the southern communities. But it starts with the Compromise of 1877, and if you can see it here, the map and this link are connected. This is a map of that Compromise of 1877 after the election of 1876. If you want to know more about that particular event, click this link here. It's a hyperlink, right? The Compromise of 1877. It's a nice quick little video on what happened there, but I'll give you the two main points and the effects of it. Through the Compromise of 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes becomes President of the United States, essentially because of a tie during the election. So this man, who's a Republican from the North in Ohio, becomes the president, and the compromise part is he will only become president if the North and Rutherford B. Hayes agree to let Union troops leave the southern states, because since the end of the Civil War, there have been Union troops stationed in those southern states, essentially ensuring peace and making sure that these laws and legislations that have been passed so far are being followed. So that's the compromise. Hayes becomes president, and then because of that, Union troops agree to leave those southern states. And the southern states now are left to their own devices. They now can control the local politics, the local laws, and the implementation of those federal laws passed, those being mainly the big ones, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. So once those southern troops start to somewhat leave those southern states, we see many southern states pass these things that we have known today as black codes. What black codes were, what they were designed to do, and we'll actually be looking at a few, where they were designed to restrict the rights and privileges of African Americans, but trying to and attempting to remain legal in the eyes of those amendments. So essentially trying to find loopholes in any of those amendments and laws, or ways around them, but also while attempting to reach the Black Code overall goal of restricting those rights of African Americans, right? Essentially what this becomes is institutionalized racism, right? Racism is obviously usually lives within, the bias of an individual. But when laws like this, like black codes, are passed, it becomes this key word here, institutionalized, meaning it's written down, meaning that even people who might not be slanted or conditioned to be racist, well, now the law says that it's potentially okay to be racist, and it tends to become the norm. So institutionalized racism is very, very dangerous, and that's what we get in the South. So right here we have a long, long list, you can see here, of actual black codes. We've talked about this in class, the difference between primary and secondary sources. This is a primary source. So these were actual written words from St. Landry's Parish, which is basically a community. A parish is another word in the South for a county or a town, which were passed in Louisiana in 1865. Okay, so right after the Civil War. So we can see lots of different things here in all these different sections, 3 all the way through 11, of different laws that were passed that restricted the rights of those African Americans living in those areas, or in this particular community in St. Landry, Louisiana. So you're going to take the time to kind of read through some of these. It's a lot of words, so I'm not going to waste your time in this video by reading through, but you're going to be coming back here on your own and completing a particular task with these. Here's your task. Step 1. You're going to either pause this video, or I'm going to post this actual slideshow into Google Classroom as well, so you can kind of skim through it on your own at your own pace. But either pause the video back on the other slide, or go into Google Classroom and look at the actual slideshow. And I want you to read through all of those codes passed by St. Landry's Parish. After you've done that, the words are pretty difficult. It's different language than we use today. And this is, over 100 years ago. I want you to choose one of those codes to kind of read through, analyze, break down, kind of figure out what it's talking about. And then I want you to summarize its purpose, or what that law was essentially saying African Americans couldn't do or could not do. And I want you to summarize it in your own words. Where are you going to summarize it? You're going to type that summary into Google Classroom right underneath the question that I will post that is titled Primary Source Analysis, Black Codes. So you'll open up that question, it'll give you a space to put your answer, type your summary there, looking for perhaps a sentence, maybe two at max. There you go. So step one, once you've completed that, you can move on to step two. Step two, I want you to again go either into Google Classroom, well actually this time you have to go into the Google Classroom version of this presentation, and then watch a quick little video from the History Channel by clicking this link. Right? It should take you to the History Channel's webpage, and it'll take you to a video called Failed Promises, I believe it's called. Click on it, and you're going to hear and see some other aspects of freed slave life in the South. Watch the video, then go back to that same exact question that you have already opened up and answered into Google Classroom, the Primary Source Analysis Black Codes question. Find your original post, so your post and summary that you've already typed, and then you should be able to have the option underneath that to respond essentially to your own post. And I want you to post underneath a new post explaining one more additional reason, along with the one you've already summarized, for why it was difficult for freed slaves to fully exercise their new freedoms and citizenship rights from what you found in the video. Okay, so in the end, you will have your original post summarizing one of the original black codes in your own words. That'll be the original post. And the second part will be a new post right underneath it, essentially responding to yourself, telling me one more difficulty, obstacle, or problem freed slaves would have faced in the South based on that video that you watched after your original post. Okay, if you have any questions, please ask me. But let's get back to the original question the student asked, all right, about why in the heck do we have this civil rights movement with people like Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X if we already dealt with some of these issues and attempted to assimilate freed slaves and African Americans into the country 100 years earlier? Well, here we have it, and hopefully you kind of know the answer now, but let's kind of define it clearly. The response to some of those southern states, right, and that response was black codes and some of the things you saw in the video. The response of some of those southern states and the communities during Reconstruction slowed the ability of freed slaves to fully join free society in the South and made it pretty difficult to begin building lives of their own in those southern communities. Whether it be because they couldn't open up their own business, they couldn't be employed, they didn't have access to education, they were intimidated into not voting. All of these things slowed the ability of that assimilation that those laws were really trying to help and aid. The second part is specifically those black codes and how they set a precedent for the future. Black codes created what we could consider a foundation or a blueprint for laws that some of us are probably more familiar with, and they would be nicknamed those Jim Crow laws. Black codes essentially set the stage for these states in the future to pass other laws. Once these black codes are challenged, they start to pass laws segregating and separating blacks and whites in the South. So the civil rights movement in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s weren't really against the issues right after Reconstruction, but they were fighting against the descendants of black codes, the Jim Crow laws. So there's a direct connection there, although they're not exactly the same thing. The black codes and the Southern resistance and the ways of finding loopholes and ways around following some of these laws directly leads to the Jim Crow laws in the South, which again takes us back to that original question, right? What were they fighting for? It was that. And so that's how Reconstruction, the civil rights movement, why there's such a long period of time in between the initial start of solving and attempting to solve some of these issues and what some would consider the beginning of the resolution or the solution to some of these problems with the civil rights movement. All right? So make sure you take care of your tasks, step 1 and 2, by looking at some of these primary sources, going into Google Classroom, following these directions here, and hopefully you have a clearer idea for what black codes are for the test, and also kind of how it's affected more modern history in the 50s, 60s, and early 1970s. All right, thank you for watching. Hope it was informative. Hope it was informative for you, and hopefully it'll better prepare you for the test this Thursday.